Juan. Hoy en Carta a la Carta tenemos un chef muy especial, un chef que ha visto la Fórmula 1 desde adentro y ha tenido el enorme privilegio de tener la palabra de un tal Bernie Ecclestone, el hacedor de la Fórmula 1 de hoy en día. Sin Bernie Ecclestone, la Fórmula 1 hoy en día no sería lo que es. Así que le damos la muy bienvenida a... ¿Lo presentamos, Steffi, o le pedimos que se presente él mismo?
Oh, yo le diría que por favor se presente él, ¿no?
Ajá.
Hi Manish, how are you? Please, could you introduce yourself, please?
I'm very well. This is Manish Pandey, and I am the writer and director of an 8-part series about the life of Bernie Ecclestone and how he created Formula One, and it's called Lucky.
Manish, first, how did you become a motorsport fan? When did that happen?
So I think it was somewhere between 11 and 13 years old. I really fell in love with the cars, I think, more than anything else. I wanted to be a fighter pilot when I was a kid. And in the same way that other children maybe love football or they love horses, for me, Formula One cars were like fighter jets, just the wings were the other way around. And the battles on the track, for me, it was just like fighter planes dogfighting. And I do remember I was a very big fan. You can't say this now, but I will say this. When I was a kid, I was a very big fan of Nelson Piquet because in England, the coverage we had for Formula One, the television pictures weren't so good. The races would start maybe just 5 minutes before the lights went out. And then as soon as the checkered flag came, the broadcast would finish. And Piquet was one of those characters where he could make an impact in a very quick way. He would say very naughty things. And I think when you're a young boy, these things impress you. But somewhere between 11 and 13, that's the answer.
Okay, and it's amazing that Piquet was your favorite driver. But why did you decide to make documentaries about motoring?
So I think perhaps I should say I actually trained as a surgeon. That was what I did for a living. That was my education, and but I was always very passionate about motor racing, and my break in film actually came from writing romantic comedies. I was a film writer. I used to do it a little bit as a doctor, but then it got picked up professionally, and this was my living. And I was working on a script for Working Title Films, who made all those romantic comedies like Four Weddings and a Funeral, or they made, what was the other great, Notting Hill, these great romantic comedies. And I'd written my own romantic comedy for them. And I was introduced to a young producer at the time, James Gay Rees, who wanted to make a story on Senna. And he wanted to do the story about the death of Senna. And Senna was really my big hero. And I remember talking to James very early, it was October 2004, about how I would approach it, which is instead of the story of his death, to tell the whole story, the story of his life, the story of his struggles, especially against Prost, against Ballest, and then sadly, of course, the story of his last days. So I worked on that very hard with James for a couple of years before we got an introduction to the Senna family. And I flew to Sao Paulo and I presented my story to Viviane Senna. And I remember she cried. It was a very, very big day in my life. I remember it was actually March the 5th, 2006. And she gave me a big hug when I finished the presentation. and she said, we're going to make this film with you. And it was an amazing feeling, because the Senna family had said yes to Antonio Banderas in 1994, and then they'd said no for the next 12 years. So it took us another 4 years to make the movie. I met Bernie Ecclestone. Viviane called Bernie's office and said, would you meet Manish and James? And so I remember I was in the Caribbean. I had 3 days notice, so I had to find a flight to London. And we were a very small company, and so we had the little meeting room, not the meeting room for the big diplomats and the prime ministers. And they nicknamed it the Playboy room, because on the back wall there's a big Playboy bunny. And Bernie came in, and 15 minutes. He didn't even sit, but he listened very carefully. And the thing about Bernie is, if he shakes your hands, that's a deal. You have to keep your part. And I remember in the end, he shook my hands and he said, just as he was leaving, give me all the money that you've got and I'll see what I can do. But he gave us access to his archive at Biggin Hill, where they kept all the tapes of every Grand Prix. And they were tapes in those days. And it took us 4 years. Asif Kapadia came on as director, and he was a feature film director. So he brought that fantastic 3 acts sensibility to the project. So that's really why it wasn't a documentary in a normal way. That's why it was more like a movie, because that was Asif's training and that was his vision. And it was great to be a part of that. And, 4 years later, we showed it to the family. Again, a lot of tears, because I think you have a lot of responsibility when you make a project like Senna, especially the way he died. And to see that on a very big 20-meter screen is very tough for the family, but they love the film. And after that, we didn't look back. We won pretty much every award. And more importantly than that, I think we won, for me anyway, the family's undying love and Bernie's respect.
Yeah. Well,
so emotionally.
I think to have Bernie's respect is something incredible, because from Argentina, the figure of Bernie Ecclestone is so far and so high in the history of Formula One that the moment that he shook his hand with you is an historical moment.
Always with Bernie. And, it's something that I've grown to understand and respect even more now that I've got to know him.
Oh, I'm so sure about that. With no spoilers, what is the essence of Grand Prix driver and heroes?
Okay, so
because Senna, you already got it.
yes. So Grand Prix driver was a project that I put together with 2 partners, and it was to tell the story of the whole season behind the scenes in a Formula One team. And we had the chance to do this with Amazon Prime, with McLaren in 2017. Sadly for us, that year, in fact, today is the 6th anniversary of the day that Bernie left Formula One. It's today. Today. It was Monday, actually, in 2017. So unfortunately for us, for my team anyway, that when the new owners of Formula One took over, they actually had a plan to do this with Netflix. And we did it with Amazon, but it was an incredible experience, because we were behind the scenes when the new Honda engine came to McLaren.
Yes.
When their drivers were Alonso for the 2nd time and Stoffel von Dorn, and it was a disaster. So sadly, it's the story of the pre-season and the disaster, the last part of the partnership, the divorce, if you like, of McLaren with Ron and the divorce of McLaren with Honda. It was a very, very tough time to be there. And I have to say, this is one of those things that makes me love Formula One even more, because Honda, look at them, they've come back. Okay, it took them 4 years after that, but they are back. They're number one. And look at McLaren. They went from being number 9. Last year, they were number 4. I mean, they are just an amazing team. And I think if you like, really, it's a story about how we can get things wrong in our lives, but how actually learning from our mistakes always makes us stronger. So that's Grand Prix Driver. And Heroes is something I'm particularly proud of. It was the first thing I directed. We directed it for the Motorsport Network, who own Autosport, Grand Prix Racing magazine. And they gave me a very specific task. They said, tell an emotional story about motor racing, but it can't be about one person and it can't be about one category. So I had a good think, and we came up with a very simple, but I thought powerful idea. Why don't we get 4 people who come from different disciplines in motor racing? So we got Felipe Massa, the greatest Brazilian since Senna, Mika Hakkinen, the greatest Finnish Formula One driver, Michèle Mouton, the greatest woman racing driver, she happened to be in rallying, and Tom Christensen, the greatest ever Le Mans driver. And we bring them to a beautiful haunted house in England, and they spend a day and a night together, and they just talk to each other about their lives. And it's better than a journalist. And what we do is we'll get the archive, and as they speak, it's like old Vikings sitting around a fire telling war stories. And as they speak, we'll go back in time and we'll show you their lives, and their lives interconnect, because this is the great thing about motor racing drivers. The really great ones, they have exactly the same motivations. They have exactly the same way that they deal with things. There's something very special about these people. And what made it more interesting is that they all have one person in common, and that's Michael Schumacher. So as they tell their stories, we also learn about Michael Schumacher's stories. And the one subtle story that's going through all of these, because again, with my doctor's hat on, this meant a lot to me, is head injuries. And every one of these drivers has a very ironic, but very beautiful and ultimately very positive story about a head injury. And the subtext of the story, again, is that, you know, we all want Michael to be whole, and we want him back. So that was Heroes.
Oh, I love you. Yes. I am al borde de las lágrimas.
Yeah, just on the brink of tears.
Yes.
Just on the brink of tears. Well, no, really. What you are telling about, first, was it very difficult to start directing?
Yes, I think, to be honest, it's one of David Bowie said something very profound, actually, when he was alive. He said, the best way to keep developing as a human being is always to swim in water, which is just a little bit too deep to stand in. Always be a little bit out of your depth. And so I think, certainly with Grand Prix Driver, I realized I think I can direct. And with Heroes, the only difficult thing about it was we gave ourselves such an impossible task, because we had only 3 days with the drivers, but the team were amazing, the people around me. And I understood my role wasn't to make sure every camera was pointing correctly or every bit of light was correct. There was no time for me personally to do that. But we had an amazing cinematographer, Robin Fox, amazing team. So my focus was to get these performances, to keep everybody talking in the right way. And I have to tell you, the hardest person in the world to direct is Mika Hakkinen. Okay. He is crazy. He's crazy. He showed up at 10 o'clock the night before the shoot. He didn't read anything I sent him. If you look at the first scene, he's not even wearing socks. He arrives in this McLaren. this is a beautiful stately home, and it has this beautiful gravel path.
Yes.
He throws the gravel everywhere. He doesn't learn his lines. He comes and sits down, but he steals the show. He's fantastic. Somehow this idiot gets it right. You know, crazy guy. You have to love him. And actually, the star is the woman, Michelle Mouton. I think they were all a little bit in love with her. I know I was, because she's beautiful. She's so tough. And she's another person. When she speaks, you just feel. You're not listening to her words. You're just feeling all the time. So, yeah, that was my directorial debut. And I think I knew after that, definitely, I could do it.
It's fantastic. It's amazing. I wrote that they feel the same about motor racing, right? It's all about the feelings. They feel, and us as spectators to right. So in a way, were you inspired by former movie documentary type as Pole Position or Speed Fever?
So not so much documentaries, but I think, you know, the few good films about motor racing, Grand Prix, 1967, Steve McQueen's Le Mans. And in fact, even when we were doing Senna, we all watched Isle of Man TT. And what these stories do is you go inside the heads of these people. And, you know, they say this about what you should do in your life. You know, when people talk to people who are dying, the people who are dying never say on their deathbeds, I wish I made more money, or I wish I went to work more often. What people say is, I wish I really pursued something that I loved, whether it was my family or my work. And I think that this is what motor racing drivers do. Yeah, you know, of course you can make money. Of course it's great to have trophies. But actually what they love is to be behind the wheel. What they love is that competition, whether it's against the clock or whether it's against another driver. They love it. This is where they live. And, you know, Senna, for me in that way, he was the biggest inspiration, because rather than seeing a movie, if you just listen to his words in interviews, it is like listening to a movie star, because not only does he describe his own passion and his own dedication and that journey, but he can also make it spiritual. So what you understand is, it's like a samurai describing his sword. It's just this relationship he has with the instrument that gives him this incredible pleasure. And winning, you know, he says it after his first win in 85. He said, it's like a drug. And once you feel it, you just want to feel it again and again and again. And I think for me, you know, I could always feel it through these people. And so it becomes a really simple ambition to bring it to others.
Manish, a question that's not in the questionnaire, but if you have to choose one F1 driver to do a documentary from all history, from 1950 up to today, who that driver would be?
Am I allowed to give you three drivers?
Oh, three drivers.
Okay.
Okay. So in reverse order, I think nobody has made kind of the story on Alonso. I think he's so intelligent. He's so fast. In some ways, so unlucky. You know, a few points, he would have had 5 championships. 3, maybe two, maybe with Ferrari out of those. But I could see that. And then the next one for me would be Reutemann, Carlos Reutemann. I think he was just, there's one word to describe him, it's beautiful. He was kind of physically beautiful. The way he drove a car was beautiful, very neurotic like me. So I understand that. Obsessive perfectionist. And if he can't get something right, gets very upset with himself, which I love. I love people like that. But Bernie always used to say to me he was too hard on himself. That was the problem, just too hard on himself. And I think the story that's never been told properly is Fanjo. You know, that would be just a beautiful story to tell as well. Who is this man? Who is this tiny man whose career really starts in his late 30s? It's a different time. Who can get into any car and make it go quickly? Who's so brave, and people around him are dying, yet somehow he has the mental discipline to just drive above that. Yet what makes him stop in the end is death. Finally, he sees too much and he realizes he needs to leave. Those would be great stories to tell.
Well, now we are moving into the star of this interview. That's Lucky. Was it very difficult to deal with Bernie Ecclestone?
Nobody is listening to us.
You know what? Maybe you'll be surprised. I think if Bernie wants to do something, he's the easiest person in the world to deal with. So I thought about this in the summer. He came to the premiere of Heroes with Fabiana, and it was really nice to see him there. And the thing about Bernie, we were saying about handshakes, if he says he's going to do something, he does it. That's it. And this is who he is. And so I went to see him in the autumn of 2019, and I had a meeting with him, and I said, will you do this? It's a story about you, but it's the whole story of Formula One. And I knew it would be 8 parts then, because I knew it would be big. And I said, we'll do all the great eras, all the great drivers. It won't be total because we don't have 80 episodes, but I think what I want to show is there's only one man who can tell the story from the beginning, and it's you. And also it'd be great to have some of you in it. You know, I want to know a little bit about your family, about where you came from, about what you were feeling as this amazing sport, you know, opened up, as you created it, really. And Bernie's got this way of looking at you when he's thinking and he wants to give you an answer. It's like he's calculating. He's literally, you see it in his eyes. He's making a decision making. And then he said, his words were, if you do it, it'll be very good, won't it? And I said, I hope so. Yes, yeah, it will. And he said, okay. And he shook my hand, and I knew we were going to do it. And then everything else becomes about logic. Everything else becomes about, you know, getting budgets, finding partners, doing the deal with Formula One. You know, they were amazing, actually. And the real thing, actually, the biggest obstacle, to be honest, wasn't Bernie, wasn't Formula, it was COVID. At the end of 2019, the rumors were coming out of China that there was going to be a problem. I don't think any of us understood how big it was going to be. And in the spring of 2020, we all locked down, but Bernie actually went to Brazil. I think you know, because what we didn't know at the time was Fabiana was pregnant with Ace. And Brazil at that point was the safest place to be. We kept in touch, but just the odd phone call, nothing very concrete. But in the early autumn of 2020, he gave me a call. He'd been in Switzerland since the summer, and Ace had been born there, and everything was good. Baby was healthy. They decided to stay in Switzerland. And he said, okay, I'm ready, come. That was an amazing feeling. So we had to get the crew together quickly. And I always had this idea of how he would look, which was white hair, white goatee, white background, and his tanned face and those blue eyes. And there's a very special piece of equipment that you can use with a camera, and it's called an Interatron. And what it is, it's a system of mirrors. And it allows me not to sit in front of him, but to sit opposite him, but to one side.
Yeah.
And we see each other through these mirrors, but without direct eye contact. And what it means is a non-professional actor, when you use this, it looks like they're looking right at you. And the face is big. And I only wanted one person to tell the story from now. Everybody else is in the archive, but only one person has to tell you the story, and it has to be Bernie. And it was amazing. When I got to Switzerland, obviously I had to self-isolate for 10 days, make sure that I was negative, because he was 89 then.
Yes.
He was going to be 90. No vaccine. So we used to meet. He has this very beautiful hotel, and we used to meet outside every day for a hot chocolate and talk for an hour. And it's completely real. This. So we do this, talk about the subjects that we would talk about. And then after 10 days, we started. And we used to do 1 or 1.5 hours every morning. He was always there, exactly 10 o'clock. And we would work till 11:30. Then he would take some time off, go and do some work, have lunch. And then we would start in the afternoon. But after a week, he would start to invite me home to lunch. And then I got to really know Fabi and Ace better. And the reason why I'm telling you this is a question I get asked by people when they see this documentary is that really Bernie, or is he acting? And I have to tell you, as far as I can see, that's the man. Now, maybe he is acting, and maybe he was acting at lunch, and maybe he was acting at dinner, but this is what you have, and these are the stories that he wants to tell you. But my feeling is he was pretty sincere throughout, because this was as much for him, and I think also for his son, as it was for us. And what was great was I was able to get so much material, 3 weeks from the first shoot, that we went back the following May and did another 2 weeks. Then we went back in July and did another 10 days. Then we went back the following May and did another week. So in the end, we've got, I think it's between 7 and 8 weeks of material. Yeah, but sometimes you need, I'm not a very fast filmmaker. I think I'd be terrible at making something quick and, quick and good and cheap. Because I think when you're dealing with somebody like Bernie, what you end up doing is you have to think very hard about what he says. He's not somebody who makes things easy. And he's seen so much. And this, I think in some ways, that Lucky is a very difficult series to watch if you really want to get the truth, because he speaks in codes, he gives you lots of clues, and you need to look at the archive. You need to look at what he says, and you need to look at what we're showing you. And I'm so glad. I mean, he never said no. I said, look, we need to come back. He said, sure. And then I said, we need to come back again. He said, sure. And so on. And the very last time we were there, the only thing I would say is that he has aged. It's hard to see, because I really like him. That's the truth of this. Maybe I'm not a journalist. I'm not a, I don't write for a magazine or a sensationalist newspaper. So, and he is a little bit of a hero of mine. He's created the sport that I love. So I really like him. And I think seeing him age has probably been the hardest thing. He's 90. The difference between 90 and 92 is very different to the difference between 18 and 20. And so there's something beautifully poetic from this too, which is, yes, he's a billionaire. Yes, he can buy anything. But if you think about what he's given me something that you can't buy. He's given me his time, and he's given me his time towards the end of his life, not the beginning. And that,
yes, it's a huge thing.
It's a huge thing. I think about it every day, every day.
Manish, a question about the name of the documentary, of the film. Who put the title? Who said it's Lucky? It was you, it was Bernie.
No, it's actually, this is very organic. When I first went to see him, October the 8th, 2019, to talk to him about this, we were just talking. We spent about an hour together. And he said to me, you know, in creating Formula One, he said, so many things happened that I never planned. He said, I get really annoyed by businessmen who sit down and say to me, oh, you know, you see what that guy did. I could have done that. I would have done that. And he says, in his experience in life, he never planned anything. This is what he said. He said, I never planned anything, but if I saw a chance to do something, I took it. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work, but in the end, I've been lucky. And that's what he says at the end of the story. And I found that so amazing, that this man he's so intelligent. I mean, he's literally the smartest guy I've ever met in my life. And he sees things in a way that it's difficult to explain. It's almost like the world is in slow motion to him. And he calculates so fast. And for him to describe his own life in that way as lucky, I thought it was a brilliant title. It is ironic, I think, the title, isn't it? He's not really lucky, unless you think being 1 meter 58 centimeters tall, with a right eye that can't see, no education beyond 15 years old, working class. Is any of that lucky? I don't think so. I don't think so.
It's a worker in a hard way.
Very hard. And he does work hard. He does work hard.
Once I read that Bernie Ecclestone, I'm not sure if that's his own words, said that his last holidays happened in 1967, 1968. And from that onwards, he kept on working 365 days a year. I don't know if that's true, but I read.
I think it is true, because the thing about Bernie that a lot of people don't understand is if you phone him, he always picks up the phone. And he will answer you. And if you send him an email, he doesn't use email, but his assistants print the emails for him. He replies to every email. He understands that his job, what he chose to do in life, spans many countries, many time zones, many governments, many private individuals. It's like the most complicated Swiss watch. And every single thing feeds into something else, and he understands it. And guys like that never really take a holiday. They just don't. He can be on his boat, but someone will call him, he'll say, excuse me. Or he can be, you know, we'll be at lunch, and he'll never ignore a phone. Never. He'll always pick it up and go, can I call you back if we're doing something? The only exception to that was obviously when we were filming.
Yes.
Actually, once he left his phone on. It was the funniest thing. He left his phone on. He got really, I don't know if you know, his phone ring is the music from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. We're filming him, and the phone suddenly went, doo, wow, 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 like that. And he looked at his phone, and first he looked really angry because he left it on. He meant to switch it off, so he was angry with himself. Then he realized who he had called him, went, Flavio, I'll call you back. Flavio Briatore. and that's Bernie.
Oh my God. Oh, wow.
That's Clint Eastwood in that moment. Somebody phoned him and Clint Eastwood is over there.
Yeah.
No, something that caught my attention in your interview with Bernie Ecclestone, as you said, are his really deep blue eyes. Because I always watch him, all right, in black and white or wearing sunglasses. But his eyesight is very penetrating. It's like, well, you are watching at him and he got your attention.
I think this is the thing about Bernie. Before he did this, I think most of us only remember him from being in a Formula One paddock or having journalists go around him and and he answers very quickly, and he tells you just what he needs to tell you, and then he moves on. And I think he was intrigued by this style as well. He loves technical things. He loves them. He appreciates things that are technical. And I remember when we first really set up the room, he gave us a room at his hotel when we did the first shoot. And the hotel was empty because of COVID. And I remember they would close it Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and they actually gave me a key. I said to him, "Are you sure you want to do this? Because you might find me drunk in your wine cellar." And he said, "Don't worry, the key doesn't open the wine cellar. We're not that stupid." So we used to meet him, and when we first set up the room, he looked at all the lights, and he was very interested in the camera, because this is a man, remember, who brought Formula One to the world on television. So he likes these things. And when we first filmed him, I showed him a few images of himself from my point of view. And I think he was, what's the word? Yeah, he was surprised. He was surprised at how penetrating he looked. But I think that's the point. The point is that the audience need to decide on what they're being told. And he's like a lot of very powerful men. He doesn't speak loudly because he doesn't need to speak loudly. He speaks quietly, so you lean forward. He says things once, and you have to catch them. And I agree with you. I think seeing him without his glasses, it was fantastic, but it was really necessary too. You need to look into the eyes of the person who's narrating the story. And I have to tell you, just personally, so not on camera, but off camera, once in a while, suddenly it hit me who I was talking to. And he can be a little bit scary, even when you've known him for weeks in the way that I have. And I asked him a question. I said to him, "Bernie, why is it that people are scared of you?" And he said to me, "I don't know why people are scared of me. I've never actually had anyone killed."
He's a good person indeed.
I think he is. I think he lives by a very different code of conduct, different rules to me, to you. It's he's a fighter. He's had to fight for everything. And as I said, I found it quite tough. I've known him, I feel well, since September 2020, so 2.5 years. Yes. And I have found it hard to see him get older in this time. The fight's still there, but you can see the body is not maybe the same.
Yes.
The eyes are, though. The eyes are the same.
Yeah, the same. And it's two things.
Oh my God.
First, who decided that everything be white? The backstage, you. Because it's fantastic. The white shirt, the backstage, and his blue eyes, the contrast it's great, it's fantastic. And the second question is, now you have met Bernie Ecclestone personally, you work with Bernie Ecclestone personally. How about his humor?
There's a phrase in English called gallows humor. So it's a humor that you have just before you get hanged. Okay. That's his humor. He's so funny, but mostly it's very dark and you don't know whether to believe him. He loves playing tricks on you, by the way. So what he did, I remember this one very funny thing he did. I was talking to him about exactly that sort of Reutemann era, early 80s. And I was talking to him about ground effect and ground effect getting banned, and the cars becoming too quickly, and ballast. And he was looking at me in this slightly mannish what you're saying doesn't make any sense. So he's giving me this look with his eyes.
Yeah.
So I asked him a question, and his answer was, in 1982, Jean-Marie Balestre and Manish Pandey got together and created the new rules of Formula One. I don't know anything about this Formula One series that Manish and Jean-Marie created. Maybe it was good, maybe it was bad.
Yes.
But it was their rules and their creation. And I was laughing so hard because what he was saying to me was, you don't know what you're talking about. Completely wrong. I'm not going to answer this idiotic question unless you want to know what really happened. I told him all these books. I said to him, look, I read this in this book. I read this in this magazine. He's like, you don't want to read these books. Nobody knows. Nobody really knows these stories. You know, they invent them. This is what the press do. This is his sense of humor, you know, answering you as if he's in the documentary, but basically calling you an idiot.
Oh my. Okay, I had a question, but I think that you already answered me. Did you write the script? But I think that there's no script.
For this, what I had was very, very detailed chapters. So I made notes on every era, every driver, everything that I thought was important. And I would bring them up.
Yes.
And then he either wanted to say something about them because he felt it was relevant,
yes,
or he didn't. So this was much more journalistic. It was written in the sense that I did create a structure, because after those first 3 weeks, we went through all the transcripts and I realized, hold on, this is the story. This is really episode 1. It's right up until the death of Rindt. And then understood exactly what I needed to go back and do, and created a better structure. The writing for this in some ways came when we finished almost the second last interview, because that's when I was cutting this and going, this goes in this section, this goes in this section, move this to here. Filmmaking is very rigorous. It has a very, it's almost, the formula is almost like physics. There are 3 acts. You should terminate the first act a quarter of the way through. You terminate the second act 3/4 of the way through. There must be a clear obstacle. There must be an inner journey as well. So the first story, if you like, is about Bernie's journey from obscurity to becoming a named person in Formula One. But his inner journey is a journey of overcoming death.
Yes.
And it's a story about war, and war gives you the context to the death. So if you look in the story, at the beginning, you have men who look like fighter pilots who are racing in 1950.
Yes.
And Bernie tells you many of them never came back. And then what happens is he has that bond with Stuart Lewis Evans. And when Stuart is killed, he promises never to go back to motor racing. But it's a desire in him. It's very deep. Then when Jochen is killed, he says, I decided I wasn't going to walk away. So you see that progress. So that's where the writing comes in. It's taking these transcripts and making them fit a proper film or television structure. And I could, you know, the second one is very, very similar. It's all about the new teams, the new bosses. But by the time you get to the end, he's created a structure and they want to destroy that structure. They want to destroy that team of English team owner. So each one is very, I hope, very rigorous in the exact story that it tells.
Yeah. You illustrated this biography, this story, with fantastic images. Fantastic images. The other day I said, it's the first time in my life, I'm 52, that I watched Bravo Van Stake at last Monaco's turn, and Rindt won that 1970 Monaco Grand Prix. It's the first time in my life, and the quality is fantastic. Where did you get those images?
So I think Formula One, there are 2 answers. We had a fantastic archive consultant, Richard Weissman. He was great. And but we had a team who really worked with with Formula One gave us direct access to the archive with 2 laptops. So we could search the archive and look for specific races, look for specific things. And we were also lucky because Formula One bought an archive called the Brunswick Archive. So in the 1970s, I know you're obviously talking about 70 Monaco. Brunswick were commissioned by Philip Morris to film their cars. So they had color cameras. But lots of other people, this is not a poor person's sport. And rich people's sport, people have cameras. People have moving cameras. And there are a lot of these in private collections, but we were lucky because a lot of this was at Brunswick. And because Brunswick was bought by Formula One, we were able to look at things, you know, that you wouldn't believe. And I love that, that shot of Brabham. He's going to win. He literally doesn't go around the hairpin and boom, Rindt goes past him. And if you look, actually, there's a very happy interview, but if you look at Jochen Rindt with Prince Rainier on the podium, he's actually crying.
Yeah.
He can't believe it. He can't believe he's won. It's a beautiful moment.
Yes, that's why it's fantastic. To go rounding up, and thanks for all your time, because for me, I would spend here talking to you the whole day, really, the whole day, because
very sweet.
By now, are you start thinking about any other project without spoiling anything? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good one. You'll love it. You'll love it. And there's a good connection to Argentina in the next project too. So.
Okay. We were looking for. Okay. Yes.
Go on, yeah.
No, it's only to leave quiet to manage, invite our audience to watch Lucky, who well, it's your words, please.
I think Argentina has an incredible relationship with motor racing. It's a relationship that obviously goes back to Fangio and the very, very first World Championship in 1950. I think if you want to know how Formula One really happened, if you really want to connect Fangio to Senna to Hamilton, if you really want to understand why Formula One evolved in the way that it did, and some of it is very dark and contentious: alcohol, tobacco, petrol, going to countries with a military junta, going to countries with apartheid.
Yes.
But if you want to see how it is what it is now, that's why you should watch Lucky. And even more importantly than that, underneath that is a very, I think, an amazing human story about one man. Very few sports can you really say there is just one person who has made every key decision.
Yeah.
And so even if you're not a Formula One fan, I think it's just a fantastic story about this incredible man.
Well, nice. Thank you very much.